Well, you could see by what I'm wearing that the weather has turned a little chillier, especially in the morning, even though we have some great sunlight that's coming in and it's supposed to warm up towards the end of the week. I am a little cold, but I wanted to come out and work because it is still a beautiful day. And I'm actually standing in front of the Yellow Garden and the Memorial Garden. But what I'm going to be talking about today is what I was calling the Yellow Garden. And you may have seen from an earlier video, just a few weeks ago, I started planting up this bed in the front with some beautiful heathers and heucherellas and some arborvitaes and some other plants. And just within those last couple weeks and with this shift in weather change, I can't believe the colors that have been coming out from this garden and just emerging from the leaves. I mean, the one that I found most impressive, I thought the heathers would change a bit more colors, which they have. They've started to, that Blazeway and a number of the other varieties that I had showed you, started to turn out a little bit more orange. But the heucherellas, my goodness, you know, they started a little kind of chartreusey with a little bit of rust colors, and now they are bright red. So it's pretty fantastic just to see in a short period of time how much those colors change. And just to, you know, share again that these are plants that will give you 3 seasons interest, if not 4 seasons interest, especially when it comes to the conifers. Now I have a few more conifers that are coming that I want to actually plant up in this bed, but you'll see that I actually made some progress, and I didn't know if I was going to get to it this year, but I made some progress on the back side of the bed. So I added some more cardboard to take down some of the pressure of that grass that was pushing in, and I just tossed some more vermicompost and some potting mediums and some soils, garden soils in the back. And what I'm going to be doing is planting up some more plants in the back, and then I'll be using some of the our mulch, and then also some of Espoma's compost, probably the mushroom compost or maybe even the cow manure, just to kind of bed the plants in for and tuck them in for the fall and the winter months, because there's not many more days of growing season, and I want to make sure I give those roots the best possible chance of getting down into the soil very quickly before that winter weather sets in. So I'm going to show you a bit more of our plant palette. It's actually pretty different from what I planted in the front. However, I am getting some plants in, like the heathers and such, that I'll be planting also on the back side. And I don't necessarily have like a good planting plan in my mind, so I'm gonna have to take some time with this one. I know what plants that I want to put in, but I just don't know how they're going to be structured within the garden. So that's something that I'm going to take some time to figure out, but I thought I would at least share with you some of the plant palette that we're going to showcase here in the Yellow Garden. All right, so we got some big boxes here of plants, and I got 6 of these recently, and I have some of these same genera planted in the pollinator garden, and this is called Geum, and the cultivar name is Spanish Fly. And this one has a nice marmalade-y orange color with some hints of darker rust and red colors as well. It's a bit of a brighter orange, so similar to like the Asclepias that I had planted in there, but this one is pretty cool, and I love the seed heads off the Geums. So that's one thing that I want to consider as well, is like when you're thinking about a garden for all seasons, sometimes those seed heads are absolutely phenomenal. So that's something to really think about. Now, this is another echinacea, and I've tried to go with echinaceas that are a bit shorter in stature. So some of our native, non-cultivated varieties of echinaceas, or coneflowers really is what people particularly know them as, are quite tall. So they could get maybe 3 feet tall or whatnot. This one is called Kismet Intense Orange. And this is a cultivar that pretty much looks like a coneflower, but just happens to be orange and is a bit shorter in stature. So what I mean by shorter in stature is typically they're under 24 inches or 2 feet tall, which is very nice, especially in this garden, because I don't want anything that's too high. Now, somebody had mentioned sneezeweed, I think, in the last video, like, oh, you should plant some sneezeweed. And I really love sneezeweed. It's a funny name. I don't think it actually makes you sneeze. I mean, some people might be actually allergic to it. There's a lot of folks who are allergic to the Asteraceae family, but pretty much a plant that's pollinated by insects. It's not necessarily blowing around in the wind. But it has this really cool, cone, and the rays and the florets kind of come back. But it is a very tall plant. And I have some growing in the pollinator garden, and you'll just see how tall it is. And when it gets pretty heavy, especially after a rain, it just starts to go a little bit more horizontal. But I found a sneezeweed that is shorter in stature, just like I found that cone flower that was shorter in stature. And this is Helenium autumnal mariachi salsa. And this one has this nice orangish red color as well. And it just happens to be short, but it has that same kind of characteristic of sneezeweed. So I think I mentioned even in the comments and discussion with the person who had mentioned sneezeweed, if you know of a cultivar that happens to be a bit shorter in stature, tell me. Well, I just happened to find one. So that's for anybody who's interested in that. This one's another one that I recently got. It doesn't look like much. Sorry about that. It almost looks like a willow leaf, doesn't it? But this is Symphyliotrichum ciliolatus. So this is an aster. It used to be called, I think, Aster ciliolatus. So this is Lindley's aster. And this has a little bit of a blue tinge to it. It's kind of like this whitish blue tinge. And I've already planted some asters back in there, so I think that will feel a little bit more consistent. But I'm trying to collect like a number of different species of asters because they are such an important plant for both specialist and generalist pollinators, and will also generally give some nice blooms towards the end of the year when almost nothing else is in bloom. Although right now it's approaching early October, and the asters and the solidago or the goldenrods are in absolutely full bloom. Now this is another echinacea. This one is called Prima Saffron, and I only got one of these. But this is another one of those echinaceas or coneflowers that actually are low in stature and also has that kind of orange color. So it's one thing that I will actually try. And you know what, some of these cultivars, they don't attract pollinators maybe as much as our species, so you'll just have to kind of see and observe. But if you're getting plants that have like double flowers and the insects can't get to the pollen or the nectar sources, then those usually aren't that great. But if you're getting cultivars that kind of look a bit more similar and have a similar bloom time as some of the native species, then those are usually the ones that you'd rather opt into. So this is Heliopsis bleeding hearts, and this is a smooth oxeye daisy. It gets a bit more of like a reddish tinge to the leaves. I may have actually featured this one the last time, but it's also in our pollinator bed as well. So this one will bloom from June to October, but you can see that this is in a 4-inch pot, and it's quite small, so I don't expect this to be blooming this year. Actually, I even thought that our Muhlenbergia, our grasses, would bloom over here because they are quite large, but the ones in the pollinator garden are blooming and down by the meadow house, but not the ones that I planted here yet. So I'll probably have to wait until next year. Now this is one of our Achillea millefoliums. This one has a bit more of a red color. There are a couple cultivars that have a bit more of a red color, like Vintage Red, I think is an example. Now I planted pink ones in here. I've tried to take them out, but like once you plant yarrow, it just kind of spreads and spreads. So I'm gonna have to probably keep on picking them out over the next 2 years or so until I get them all. But this one is called Millie Rock Red. And this is also a pretty small growing yarrow. So it grows up to about 1 foot tall. And so I figured I could, like, by the ones I'm taking out of the garden here, and I'm kind of replacing them in the meadow and the pollinator garden and also the herb garden, and I'm going to replace it with this one. Now this is Augustaki, and I have Augustaki growing in the pollinator garden. So many different kinds of flavors of Augustaki. This is also called hummingbird mint. And most of the ones that I have in the pollinator garden are shades of like salmons and roses and pinks and raspberries and fuchsias and things along those lines. And it's called hummingbird mint for a reason. The hummingbirds absolutely adore it. I see other insect pollinators that are in it. It really has these like tubular flowers, as you could see. And it is a native to the US and also to North America, but I don't think we have any native hummingbird mints out here in the Northeast, but it doesn't matter because our pollinators absolutely love them, especially the hummingbirds. And this one is a yellow one. So this one is called Poquito Butter Yellow. And even though this is not going to be the yellow garden any longer because there's going to be more colors, it is going to have those warm tones of yellows, oranges, and reds complemented with blues and purples as well. So it's kind of got every color of the rainbow at the end of the day. Oh, this one's actually blooming right now, so I'll show you this. This is Coreopsis red elf. I don't know if you could see that bloom. It's just a tiny little one. And Coreopsis will kind of bloom up until September, but the ones that I have planted in there, I think I have Zagreb is the name of the cultivar. It's a Coreopsis verticillata, so that's our native Coreopsis, or they're also called tick seed. And really great, reliable blooms, and sometimes they'll push out pretty late in the season. Now this is a Coreopsis that spreads very well, just like the Zagreb. You'll see it kind of everywhere. It's really robust on one side of the garden, and I think I only planted like a few plants and it's really spread out. But this one, which is called Red Elf, has this really nice velvet magenta rays with a nice little yellow center, and it doesn't grow that tall. It grows about 12 inches. So the Zagreb actually grows a little bit taller, but I thought this would be nice to kind of fill out and maybe blend in with some of those yellow Coreopsis that I have in the back. This one has a very similar color palette to that Achillea that I just showed you, that Millie Rock Red. Now I'm going to change it up a little bit, and you'll see that this is Heliotrichon sapphire. So this is a blue oat grass, and I don't think that this is native to the Northeast, and I don't even know if it's native to North America, but it's a clumping grass, so it's not one of those rhizomatous grasses that spread and spread and spread and can be really considered invasive. But this one is really beautiful because it's structural. You could see that it has this upright structure and that it has that blue leaf, which I think is so beautiful. And I have many of these types of grasses. I don't know if I have this specific one in the Memorial Garden, but I figured I would bring this one into this bed because I love that structure of the upright nature of blue grasses next to some of those orange and red heathers. I just think it's so stunning to do that. So I actually might plant some of these in and around the heathers. I'll see if I have enough space. I may not, but I'll kind of swing that towards maybe the back end where the south is, because these like to be in a drier space in the garden with some nice south-facing full sun. And I am also getting some more heathers, so I might put those in the back and swing that around so that it feels a bit more consistent. So if you're walking around the garden, it doesn't like change from the back side to the front side and it looks like a completely different garden. But these are nice and short, so these grow 18, maybe 20 inches tall, and then you'll get a nice brownish orange inflorescence, and I think that will be really nice to see, because again, some of these grasses will keep their shapes and their color all season long, and then they'll give these beautiful inflorescences and seed heads as well. All right, so let me see. This one is very different from the Heliotrichon, but it looks the same. So this is Festuca Elijah Blue, and I planted this one in the Memorial Garden, so you could see that it's a bit shorter and denser, and this wants very similar conditions to the one that I just showed you. So it really likes that full sun condition. It likes to be in a drier condition. And this one only grows 8 inches, so it's a little tinier. So maybe this is something that I can kind of fit a bit more within the heathers. You know, we'll see. I also don't want it to be overtaken by the heathers either, because they could tend to, they don't grow too high, but they still grow higher than 8 inches. What is this one? Okay, so this is a salvia, and this is Salvia cardona, or this is meadow sage. And I think I may have planted some of the sages in the last time I was here. They might have been in a slightly more precarious condition than these, but this is, again, I like the salvias. I mean, they're great pollinator plants and they actually perform well. I actually have some salvias that are still blooming. They seem to rebloom. So some of the ones in the pollinator garden are reblooming. I just don't know if they're as interesting to the pollinators later in the season. And I'm not sure if their pollen sources actually change when they're blooming, because where I see pollinators now are frankly on the asters, they're on the phloxes, they're on the sneezeweeds. They're not necessarily on that sage. They don't really give it the time of day, if you will. So now this is something different. I mean, this is a new cultivar and I've planted sedums in the memorial garden, but this is sedum called Sedum Bright Idea. So this one was a new one for me and it only grows to about 12 inches high. Some of the sedums that I have tend to be very tall and then they get very top heavy because of their blooms and then they kind of fall over a little bit. So sometimes their structure isn't that great. But this one, what I loved about it is that it had these bright yellow flowers, and if you could see up close, it has these really nice red stems and these bright green leaves. So I really like the contrast of that, and because I have a lot of this garden actually built up, I really wanted to plant some of those drier loving garden plants like up top. And so I felt like this one would be one that I could try, and because I had sedums in the memorial garden, the adjoining garden, that it will feel a little bit more consistent with one another because I don't want to go too different. Remember, this is a garden that should connect all the other gardens because the spokes of the wheel are around it, and this is the center, the hub of the wheel. And it really connects a lot of the plants that are in the meadow and some of the surrounding gardens like the pollinator garden and the garden in front of the house. So that is what I have to work with. I have a few more plants that are coming in. I'm gonna, just basically try to plant these up and find out where they should go and see what gaps I have before the end of the year, because I probably have a good, fingers crossed, maybe 2, perhaps 3, or even maybe 4 weeks to continue planting before it gets winter time here, but we'll see what the weather holds. Well, it's gotten mighty hot already. I'm gonna have to take off this plaid, but I just removed a giant Panicum virgatum that was in the back here. And it was beautiful. It was really loving the space that it was in, but it was really crowding out some of the conifers, the Coreopsis or the tick seed, and also that viburnum in the back. That viburnum is going to spread out, and I really like the way that looks. And I planted this Panicum up with a number of others that are a little bit more well-behaved when we were just taking things out of the meadow and tossing it in here with no design consideration in mind. So I had to take this one out. I'm probably gonna plant it up in a giant planter, and if it doesn't fit in there, then I'm going to plant it in the meadow, but it's gonna be a mighty hole that I have to dig. So there is a pretty superficial hole back there that came up with the sod, so I'm just gonna fill that in with the Espoma land and seed compost, just so that there's not a hole in the garden bed. I don't know if I'm gonna plant anything right in there right away. Maybe some of that Coreopsis red elf, so that's the lower growing red Coreopsis that I had showed you earlier. But there's a few more Panicums back here, but I think they're in better positions than what that Panicum was in. So I'm gonna, say I'm gonna leave those in there, even though they're a little bit more manageable. In 2 years, they might get so big that I have to take those out. And they can be quite a bear because sometimes their roots go quite deep and they're planted on the higher part of the bed, which means that their roots could potentially go deeper. But at this stage, I'm pretty happy that I removed it because I really wanted that viburnum to breathe a bit more. So you'll see how the rest of the bed turns out. Hopefully I'll get this all planted up and finished within the next 5 minutes, but I already see that there's a lot of space in the bed, which means I could probably use a bit more plants. Luckily, I have some more that will be coming in this week, so I could plant them up in there and then I could see where we land with it after that. If you find our videos enlightening, do give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to know when the next new videos launch, hit the notifications button while you're at it. Your viewership and support of the channel goes a long way. We commit 10% of our Google AdSense revenues back to great community projects in the Finger Lakes community, which is matched by our partners over at Espoma Organic. So it's just another way to help build strength and support within the community by the community. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next video.